In the autumn of 1918, the Spanish flu swept across Willowbrook, Massachusetts, leaving despair in its wake. 47 children fell ill. One by one, they slipped into slumber, and they never woke. Not quite dead, not quite alive. For a century, their bodies remained locked in a state between life and death, breathing, dreaming, silently. And what they dreamed has been hidden, sealed in archives no living eye was meant to see. A place of science, or of horror. Records were lost, witnesses disappeared, and the world carried on, oblivious to the secret that lingered in the darkness of Willowbrook. For 100 years they dreamed, and now we are beginning to understand what those dreams have been telling us. This is the story of the sleepers of Willowbrook. Before we uncover the truth about Dr. Alaric Penrose and the 47 children who never woke, make sure you're subscribed and have the bell turned on. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and whether you believe some dreams can outlast death itself. Now let's return to 1918. In the autumn of 1918, the town of Willowbrook, Massachusetts, stood like so many New England communities of its time, proud, industrious, and convinced of its moral certainty. Nestled between the dense birch forests of Essex County and the slow grey ribbon of the Merrimack River, it was a place of clean white steeples and slate rooftops, of tidy cobblestone streets that echoed with the iron clatter of horseshoes long after the first automobiles had appeared. Willowbrook had prospered quietly through the textile boom of the late 19th century. Its mills, powered by water wheels and later by coal furnaces, produced the kind of fine cotton that lined Boston's parlors and supplied the uniforms for troops bound for the Great War overseas. It was a town that believed itself blessed, where the cemetery lay on a hill high enough to overlook the river, and the dead were said to sleep with the purest view in the county. The year 1918 tested every such illusion of order. The war had drained the town of its young men. Church bells rang less often, and when they did, it was not for weddings. Influenza arrived not in storms but in whispers, first as faint reports from Boston, then as quarantines, then as funerals. Within 3 months, entire households had vanished behind shuttered windows, and bedsheets hung across doorways as crude filters. It was in this climate of quiet dread that Dr. Alaric Henry Penrose returned to Willowbrook. He was 39, slender, meticulous, and possessed of that unshakable confidence that comes from both education and inheritance. The Penrose family had been among the town's founders, owning much of the riverfront land where the first textile mills were built. His father, Judge Horace Penrose, had presided over the Essex County Courthouse for 27 years and was remembered for his unyielding sense of propriety. Alaric inherited B. of the house on Willow Lane, a grand federal-style home of brick and white trim, and the mannerisms of command that came so easily to his lineage. He had studied medicine at Harvard, completing his residency in neurology at Johns Hopkins just as war was declared in Europe. While other doctors volunteered for military service, Alaric petitioned instead to establish a neurological convalescence ward in his hometown. He cited research into post-encephalitic states as his purpose. The state medical board approved the proposal without inquiry. By the spring of 1918, the Willowbrook Sanatorium for Children and Convalescents opened its doors in a converted mill building at the edge of town. The structure was formidable, 3 stories of red brick with arched windows and a central cupola crowned by a weather vane in the shape of a serpent. Residents recalled the faint odor of carbolic acid that clung to its corridors and the near-perfect silence maintained within its wards. Local newspapers celebrated the opening. The Willowbrook Gazette, dated May 2, 1918, carried the headline, "Local Physician Establishes Modern Infirmary. Hope for Our Youngest, promised by Dr. Penrose." But behind the sanctified rhetoric, there was unease. Those who had known Alaric as a boy remembered him differently. Brilliant, yes, but detached, almost theatrical in his precision. Teachers had remarked that he possessed the gift of memorizing pain. He had spent hours observing animals, recording the moment their movement slowed and stopped, fascinated by what he termed the border between vitality and cessation. In private correspondence discovered decades later in the attic of the Penrose estate, a letter dated 1899 and addressed to a fellow student in Baltimore reads, "The cessation of consciousness is not death, merely its absence. If one could sustain the body without the mind, it would exist as an instrument of pure biological duration. Imagine a patient whose sleep becomes unbroken, whose dreams extend beyond the tyranny of waking." The tone was philosophical, not criminal, but it was also prophetic. By late September 1918, the Spanish influenza had reached Essex County. The first confirmed Willowbrook fatality was recorded on September 29th, a 12-year-old girl named Clara Goff, who died within 12 hours of fever onset. Within a week, the churchyard overflowed, families burned bedding in their yards, schools shuttered indefinitely, and the town's mayor placed the infirmary under quarantine. Dr. Penrose volunteered his facility as the central treatment ward for children. Parents, desperate for help, surrendered their sons and daughters into his care. He promised not merely treatment, but recovery. In public statements preserved in the county archive, he assured the population, "This illness, while cruel, reveals in its fever a secret, a passage within the mind that medicine has not yet mapped. The dreams of the afflicted may yield to understanding if we only listen." To most, it sounded like poetic confidence. To a few, it sounded like hubris. The sanatorium expanded rapidly. Temporary wooden wings were erected on either side of the main structure, and by November, over 60 children were under Dr. Penrose's supervision. Nurses described him as tireless, working by lamplight through the night, transcribing the rhythmic murmurs of sleeping patients, sketching diagrams of neural pathways across ledger pages. His assistants, Dr. Miles Rowe and Miss Eleanor Harcourt, handled the practical care, bathing, feeding, and sedating patients as needed. But Penrose's focus was singular. He was less concerned with healing than with recording. Visitors noted that he spoke of the children not as individuals but as subjects of consciousness. He referred to them by number rather than name. Among the townspeople, admiration turned to superstition. Mothers whispered that Penrose could call sleep with a touch. Some claimed that the doctor's own wife, Margaret Penrose, had been an early victim of influenza and that her body lay sealed in a private wing of the infirmary, kept in a state between prayer and death. No official record of her burial exists. Architectural plans of the infirmary, recovered from the county archives, show a curious feature. Beneath the main ward, a sub-basement chamber accessible only through a steel door marked for observation storage. The blueprints list its purpose as cryogenic supply, though refrigeration technology of that sophistication did not exist in 1918. In letters dated that same winter, Dr. Rowe wrote to the Massachusetts Board of Health requesting additional ether and morphine to sustain prolonged sedation. His request was denied. Yet supply manifests from a Boston pharmaceutical firm indicate monthly deliveries far exceeding what could legally be prescribed. Meanwhile, the town's mortality reports began to decline. Children admitted to the infirmary were not returning home, but neither were they recorded as deceased. Families were told their children remained in stable condition and were discouraged from visiting due to contagion risk. By December, the snow lay deep along the river, and the sanatorium windows glowed faintly through the fog. The town had grown used to the absence of certain voices, the laughter that once carried through the schoolyard, the hymns that once filled the church gallery. Willowbrook had become quiet, too quiet. Yet within that silence, Dr. Penrose's experiment had reached its second stage. In a diary entry dated December 18, 1918, he wrote, "The neural response has slowed to near imperceptibility, yet the vital signs persist. Pupillary constriction endures beyond the expected threshold. Breath becomes thought, thought becomes dream. I am close now. The border is porous." What Penrose meant by the border remains subject to speculation. Some historians interpret it as a metaphor for consciousness. In the spring of 1919, as the last frost retreated from the Merrimack Hills, Willowbrook appeared to breathe again. The schools reopened. The black mourning ribbons faded from front doors. At the river mills, the machinery thundered once more, and the air filled with cotton dust and optimism. To most, the tragedy of the influenza was becoming a distant ache. But to Samuel Everett Hale, it was not. Samuel was 19 that spring, the eldest son of a mill foreman, thin as a rail and prematurely old in the eyes. His mother had died of influenza the previous October, his two younger sisters among those sent to the Willowbrook sanatorium. He had never seen them again. He worked as an assistant to the town's postmaster, which meant access to the government mailbags that passed through the station. It was there, in late April, that he noticed something peculiar: crates addressed to the Willowbrook Institute for Somnial Medicine, each stamped with the seal of the Massachusetts State Board of Health. They arrived twice a month by rail and bore the notation, "Medical glass, handle with care." Curiosity became a habit. Samuel began copying down the shipping labels and tracing the senders. Some came from Boston, others from as far as New Haven and Philadelphia. Most, however, originated from a private laboratory supply firm in Baltimore, a city he knew only as the place Dr. Penrose had once studied. One morning, while loading parcels, he overheard the mail clerk whispering to a railway man, "They say the doctor's keeping them under glass, like bugs he is." The clerk laughed, but Samuel did not. His father dismissed his unease. "The doctor's done more good than harm," he said. "Let him be." But Samuel could not. The absence of his sisters felt like a weight that never shifted. He wrote to the institute requesting permission to visit them and received a curt reply: "Visit." Patient deferred until the conclusion of therapeutic study. No date, no signature, only the initials AHP. In early May, Samuel sought work at the infirmary itself. Laborers were being hired to repair the roof, and he presented himself among them. His hands, roughened by years at the mill, and his youth made him acceptable. Within days he was carrying planks across the north wing, glancing down through the skylight at the corridors below. He described the sight years later in a letter never meant for publication. They were laid in rows, each child on a cot, with a wire leading from the temple to a small glass vial. The doctor walked between them as if tending a garden. He stopped often, wrote in a book, then placed his ear to each mouth as though listening for a word. On the third week of his employment, Samuel noticed a small side door beneath the western stairwell, half buried behind a pile of coal sacks. The lock was old and weak. At dusk, when the workday ended, he returned with a lantern and pried it open. The passage led downward. The air grew colder, thicker, carrying the scent of metal and disinfectant. He found himself in a corridor lined with pipes that hummed faintly. At the end stood a heavy door marked Observation Storage. Inside was a chamber illuminated by a single blue lamp. Rows of narrow drawers filled the walls. Each bore a brass plate engraved with numbers. On the central table lay a notebook bound in oilcloth and a series of jars containing a pale amber liquid. Suspended in one of them was something that looked like a human eyeball. The notebook was a ledger, entries written in Dr. Penrose's careful hand. Samuel opened it to the middle and read. Subject 24. Sleep uninterrupted. Neural persistence constant. Dream content stable. Repetitive fields. Low auditory interference. Each page carried similar observations, cold and methodical. But beneath the formal notations in the margins were fragments of sentences that chilled him. A colony of the dreaming. Their silence sustains the equilibrium. When the collective unconscious matures, awakening will begin. He copied as much as he could onto a scrap of paper and fled. The next morning he confided in Miss Eleanor Harcourt, one of the senior nurses known in town for her kindness. She listened gravely, then said only, "You mustn't speak of this, Samuel. You'll ruin yourself." When he insisted, she replied, "You don't understand what he's doing. None of us do, but it is larger than you think." That night, the infirmary bell tolled once. The next day, Miss Harcourt was gone. The other nurses said she had left for Boston to recover her nerves. Samuel felt watched. He noticed Dr. Rowe observing him at meals and the porter checking his tool bag before he left for the day. Once, while returning from work, he saw Dr. Penrose standing in the courtyard, looking directly at him. The doctor raised a gloved hand in greeting. The gesture was polite. The eyes were not. In June, Samuel decided to act. He composed a letter to the Boston Medical Review enclosing the copied notes and another to the Essex County Herald. He mailed both under false names. He also approached the town constable, showing him the pages. The constable glanced at them briefly, sighed, and said, "You'd best burn those, son. That man saved this town." A week later, Samuel fell ill. At first it was fatigue. He attributed it to heat, to overwork, but within days the symptoms deepened. A dull ache in the stomach, metallic taste in the mouth, numbness in the fingertips. He lost his appetite. His handwriting began to tremble. The town physician, Dr. Horace Leland, examined him and pronounced it a mild recurrence of influenza. He prescribed rest and a tonic. When Samuel asked what the tonic contained, Leland smiled. "A touch of morphine, a touch of quinine. You'll sleep well." Sleep he did. But each time he woke, his limbs felt heavier. The numbness spread. He tried to write again, but the letters collapsed into illegible scratches. In his final coherent note, later found hidden beneath his floorboard, he wrote, "I have not dreamt my own dreams for days. I feel others moving behind my eyes." On the 7th night, he was discovered unconscious by his father and carried to the infirmary, ironically, the very place he had feared most. Dr. Penrose received him personally. The record of admission lists neurological collapse, probable post-influenza paralysis. Within 24 hours, Samuel was unresponsive. The nurses who tended him reported faint electrical activity but no voluntary movement. His breathing slowed, steadied, and became identical to that of the sleeping children. He was declared comatose and placed in the upper ward. Dr. Leland signed the certificate. Cause of illness: complications of respiratory failure. On July the 2nd, the town buried an empty coffin under Samuel Hale's name. The grave lies still in Willowbrook Cemetery, 3rd row from the western wall. Inside the infirmary, however, his body remained. Dr. Penrose's ledger for that date includes the following notation. Subject 48, male adolescent, induced via indirect contamination. Transition successful. The entry concludes with one chilling line: dreams expanding, the circle widens. In the months that followed, small details began to trouble the community again. Dogs barked at the infirmary fence at night. A grocer swore he saw lamplight burning in windows long thought abandoned. A stonemason passing by claimed to hear children humming faintly in unison. But no one investigated. The war was over. The mills were full again. The town had chosen peace over truth. What became of Samuel's letters is uncertain. Neither the Boston Medical Review nor the Essex County Herald published them. Decades later, a fragment believed to be one of his copies surfaced in a private collection in Salem. It bore water damage and partial text, but one phrase was legible near the end. "If the body sleeps without end, the mind will seek company. They are gathering." That phrase, dismissed for nearly a century, would later prove prophetic. For when neurologists re-examined the Willowbrook children in 2018, they reported a synchronized neural pattern, 47 distinct brains sharing identical frequencies, as though linked by a single dream. But that revelation lay far in the future. In 1919, Samuel Everett Hale became the first adult to join them in the endless sleep, and the town that might have saved him chose instead to forget. Dr. Penrose continued his work undisturbed, his reputation intact, his funding secure. The ledger grew thicker. The children remained silent. And somewhere deep within the sanatorium's foundation, the machinery of their dreaming hummed on, patient as time itself. By the winter of 1919, Willowbrook had ceased to question Dr. Penrose. What had begun as a humanitarian endeavor had become an institution of quiet reverence. The townspeople spoke of him as one speaks of a force of nature, inevitable, inscrutable, and best left undisturbed. The sanatorium, once a converted mill, had expanded again. 2 new wings, financed by private donors, rose along the riverbank. Their windows were narrow, their walls fitted with lead lining. Officially, these additions were meant for long-term convalescence and experimental therapy. Unofficially, they served as containment for what Penrose called the system. No document survives in his own hand explaining precisely what the system was, yet fragments of correspondence, intercepted decades later, allow historians to reconstruct its shape. It was not a machine in the mechanical sense, but a structure, physical, social, and moral, that permitted cruelty to proceed without interruption. At its heart stood 3 figures besides Penrose himself. Dr. Miles Rowe, his deputy, was a pragmatic man of few words. He had served as a field medic in France, where he witnessed both shell shock and the new science of electrotherapy used upon soldiers' nerves. His letters to colleagues in Boston reveal fascination with the idea that trauma may reset the brain to a pliant state. Penrose called him the steady hand. Miss Clara Dorsey, a nurse and bookkeeper, managed the infirmary's accounts. Her ledgers show careful balancing of public grants and private endowments, most notably payments from the estate of Edmund Langford, a textile magnate whose only son had died of influenza. Langford's donations ensured his family's name adorned the main ward, and that no questions about oversight were ever raised. The third accomplice was attorney Josiah Keene, who handled the Institute's legal filings. He had once served as clerk under Judge Horace Penrose, Alaric's father, and considered himself a loyal friend to the family. It was Keene who drafted the bylaws of the Willowbrook Institute, inserting clauses that effectively exempted it from local inspection. Among them was one sentence that would haunt future inquiries. Patients under continuous sedation shall be considered neither deceased nor cognizant, and therefore outside municipal jurisdiction. Together, these 3 enabled Penrose to construct a sanctuary for his obsession. The sanatorium operated with bureaucratic perfection. Each patient was assigned a number, each number cross-referenced in 3 separate volumes: admission, observation, and dream content. The latter recorded descriptions of the patient's neural activity as measured by a crude electroencephalograph built by Rowe, a device that traced trembling lines of ink on long rolls of paper. The staff was reduced to a skeleton crew. Most nurses had resigned by 1920, replaced by younger women from neighboring towns who were told little and paid well. The remaining assistants lived on site and were forbidden to leave after dark. Their wages were distributed in cash envelopes, signed only AHP. What kept them silent was not loyalty but fear. A surviving affidavit from one orderly, James Weller, given years later to a state investigator, describes his duties. "We were told to keep the bodies warm and fed. Every 12 hours, each subject received a broth through a tube and the oil applied to the skin to prevent drying. The doctor said they were alive, though I never saw one move. Some nights, I heard murmurs, low voices that seemed to come from nowhere, as if the whole room were breathing together." When asked why he did not flee, Weller replied, "He said if they woke too soon, the sickness would start again. He said we were holding it back." That notion, the id, that the sleepers were somehow containing the plague, became the central myth sustaining the town's silence. The influenza had ravaged every surrounding county except Willowbrook. Neighboring communities suffered renewed outbreaks in 1920, but Willowbrook remained untouched. Penrose was hailed as the man who stilled the fever. Churches held prayers in his name. The mayor called him our modern saint. And so, under the cover of gratitude, the experiment deepened. Each month, a supply cart arrived from Boston bearing glass vials labeled Compound A9 and Serum B12. Penrose noted in his records that these mixtures were essential for maintaining cortical preservation. He also began receiving small crates marked specimens, neural tissue, porcine. Their purpose remains unclear. In 1920, 3 new patients were admitted, children orphaned by the pandemic in other towns. Their guardianship was signed over to the Institute by local magistrates at Penrose's request. The forms were legal, the motives were not. Miss Dorsey's journals, recovered posthumously in 1952, reveal her growing discomfort. One entry reads, "He says they speak to him now, in images, that the dreams are synchronizing. He calls it the Great Sleep. Sometimes he stands over them for hours, lips moving, as if receiving instructions." Another, "Dr. Rowe asked if we are doing God's work or ending it. The doctor laughed and said, 'We are refining it.'" The first public suspicion arose in August 1920, when the body of a young nurse, Beatrice Klein, was found in the river below the infirmary bridge. Her death was ruled accidental, drowning following fainting spell. But the autopsy, quietly suppressed, showed no water in the lungs. There was, however, a trace of the same amber compound found in the laboratory. Weeks later, her name disappeared from payroll records. Still no charges were brought. By late autumn, the infirmary's population stabilized at 48. One of them was Samuel Hale, another was a child named Anna Whitaker, age 8, admitted for residual fever. She was the daughter of the town's blacksmith who recalled signing a consent form under duress. "He told me she'd die if I took her home," the father later testified, "so I left her there. God forgive me." Dr. Rowe's notes from that winter grow erratic. On December 12, 1920, he recorded that several subjects exhibited simultaneous increase in pulse, despite no external stimulus. He wrote, "Their dreams are converging. Subject 12 whispered words I could not understand, yet Subject 14 responded with the same sound moments later. Impossible unless they are linked." The same day, Rowe resigned and left town without collecting his final pay. His whereabouts remain unknown. Penrose, now alone in authority, intensified his work. He hired laborers to dig trenches near the river, claiming to be installing new drainage. But later geological surveys revealed concrete vaults beneath those trenches, sealed chambers measuring 12 feet by 8, lined with lead, each containing a single bed frame. Whether these chambers held additional patients or served another function remains one of the enduring mysteries. Correspondence from Attorney Keene to a state senator in 1921 suggests political influence was already at play. Any further inspection of the Willowbrook facility should be avoided. The Institute's donors include men whose goodwill the party cannot afford to lose. With legal protection secured, Penrose turned his attention to what he termed the transfer. Surviving fragments of his red ledger describe attempts to transmit dream content from the sleepers into external subjects, specifically adults under hypnosis. One entry, dated April 1921, reads, "Subject 9's imagery induced involunteer via auditory tone sequence. Result, panic, self-harm, immediate termination of experiment. Concluse. Ion, dreams not meant for waking comprehension." The volunteer's name was not recorded. Local rumor spoke of a salesman who vanished after visiting the infirmary that spring. Despite such failures, Penrose's conviction only hardened. He lectured privately to select benefactors, claiming that consciousness itself could be harvested, extracted from the fevered brain at the threshold of death, and preserved like amber around an insect. He described his patients as anchors in the collective ocean of dream. To those who heard him, he seemed inspired, even divine. "He spoke as if God had confided in him," wrote one attendee. Meanwhile, within the town, unease rippled quietly. Families whose children had entered the infirmary 3 years prior began pressing for answers. The mayor convened a committee to review patient welfare. Penrose responded with impeccable politeness, offering tours of the upper wards, clean, orderly rooms containing empty beds and immaculate linens. The lower levels remained locked. When asked to produce the children, he replied, "They rest deeply. To disturb them would undo the cure." The committee signed off its report with unanimous approval. Yet something had shifted. The sanatorium's reputation, once sacred, began to curdle into legend. Fishermen refused to cast nets near its outflow pipe. claiming the water there was too warm even in winter. Children dared each other to touch the fence at night. Dogs would not cross the road leading to the main gate. Still, the institution endured. It thrived precisely because the horror was bureaucratic, not theatrical, hidden behind clean ledgers and white walls, executed in silence and paperwork. That was Penrose's genius. His system did not require loyalty or belief, only compliance. By 1922, even the federal government acknowledged his success in containing post-pandemic trauma. A grant was approved for expansion. Plans were drawn for a second facility in Connecticut. But before construction began, the first signs of collapse appeared. In February 1923, residents of Willowbrook awoke to a deep rumbling from the direction of the infirmary. A portion of the riverbank had caved, flooding the lower chambers. Workers arriving later found the doctor standing on the grounds, coat drenched, staring into the mist. He ordered them away. The official report blamed thawing frost, but when state inspectors visited a week later, they found traces of human tissue embedded in the mud. The matter was buried, literally and legally. The report vanished into the archives. That spring, the institute closed its doors to the public for structural renovation. No one saw Dr. Penrose in town again. For decades afterward, rumors persisted that he had moved his research south, that he had joined a government laboratory, that he had drowned himself in the Merrimack. No proof was ever found. What remained, sealed behind iron and concrete, were the children, 47 in total, their breathing steady, their bodies uncorrupted, and the system designed to sustain them continued to hum, powered by a generator that somehow never ran dry. When workers breached the sub-basement in 2018, that generator was still running. Its wiring was crude, patched over the decades, but functional. The oxygen pumps had been replaced at least twice with modern components, though no one knows by whom. Who maintained the sleepers all those years? Who kept the lights burning in a building officially abandoned since 1921? Theories abound. Some speak of a secret order descended from Penrose's surviving associates. Others suggest the town itself, consciously or not, preserved the lie out of fear that waking the dreamers might also awaken what they dreamed of. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The system endured long after its creator was gone, fed by the same silence that had birthed it. As one historian wrote, reviewing the sealed archives in 1958, in Willowbrook, morality did not fail through malice but through convenience. It was easier to believe the children were asleep than to admit they were sacrificed. By 1923, the sanatorium had begun to attract attention beyond Willowbrook. Whispers had spread through Essex County about children who did not age, about lights burning in empty wings, about faint murmurs heard across the frozen river. The local press, timid at first, began to probe. One reporter, Elias Pembroke, arrived from Boston in February under the guise of writing a human interest story on post-pandemic recovery. Pembroke quickly realized something was amiss. During his first visit, he was escorted through the upper wards by Miss Dorsey, who still managed accounts despite the sanatorium's semi-seclusion. She led him past rows of empty beds, down clean corridors, until they reached a steel door, larger than any other in the building. "Restricted," she said. "Authorized personnel only." Even from a distance, Pembroke felt unease. Behind the door, faint, rhythmic hums pulsed through the floor. The sound was subtle, almost melodic, yet insistent. Miss Dorsey offered no explanation, only a warning. "Leave that door alone, Mr. Pembroke. Curiosity here does not end well." Undeterred, the reporter returned at night, hiding in a shadowed alcove. He observed Penrose, tall and unyielding, moving through the lower chambers with the measured precision of a conductor, monitoring instruments and noting entries in the crimson ledger. The children lay motionless, yet the faint rise and fall of their chests betrayed life. Pembroke attempted to gain access on multiple nights but was thwarted. Guards, temporary workers, and the threat of legal repercussions, enforced by Attorney Keene, kept the secret sealed. Even Dr. Rowe, whose resignation years prior should have created distance, was rumored to make brief, silent visits. By late spring, anomalies accelerated. Workers reported that one of the children, Anna Whitaker, had begun murmuring in her sleep, phrases that no one read. Cognized. Soon afterward, a sudden electrical surge caused several recording instruments to fail simultaneously. The generator that powered the sub-basement chambers, previously considered infallible, sputtered briefly before resuming. Rumors of Penrose's instability began circulating. Locals recalled seeing him standing for hours in the courtyard, eyes fixed on the fog rolling over the river, muttering words under his breath. Some described him as speaking to shadows. Others claimed he sometimes stood over the sleeping children with hands raised, as if conducting invisible symphonies. The first violent confrontation occurred in June 1923, in the midst of a fierce storm. A young labourer, tasked with repairing the east wing, claimed he saw Penrose attempt to extract one of the sleeping children from the sub-basement chamber and carry it outside, against the objections of Miss Dorsey. Witnesses heard a commotion, then a scream cut short. When authorities arrived after the storm subsided, both the child and Penrose were gone. The ledger noted tersely, Subject 15, temporary absence, observations deferred. Officially, no child had left the institute. No body was ever found. Some townspeople whispered that Penrose had walked into the fog and never returned. The disappearance did little to halt the sanatorium's operations. With Penrose gone, the remaining staff, chiefly Dorsey and Attorney Keane, maintained the system with bureaucratic rigor. Yet cracks had begun to appear. One nurse, under pressure from the constant hum and isolation, attempted to alert local authorities. She reported that several children had begun scratching against the sides of their beds from within the sub-basement, an unnatural movement suggesting awareness and panic. Authorities dismissed the claims, attributing the noises to imaginative overwork and post-influenza neurological tremors. The nurse resigned shortly afterward and moved away, never to speak publicly of the matter again. By 1924, patterns of disappearance were evident. Residents of Willowbrook noted that families who had lost children to the sanatorium often experienced deaths or sudden illnesses among the remaining household. One elderly couple lost both sons within a month of questioning the institute. Publicly, these were attributed to influenza relapses, but community law recorded the coincidences with horror. In late 1925, a small uprising of curiosity arose. Local boys attempting to sneak into the sub-basement were caught by Keane. He reportedly warned them, "Curiosity is a luxury reserved for the dead. Leave this place." The threat alone silenced further intrusion. It was during this period that the final mysterious disappearances occurred. Witness testimony is fragmentary. Accounts suggest that Penrose returned briefly, older, pallid, dressed in black and accompanied by an unknown man, only to vanish again without trace. One statement filed by a farmer's wife who claimed to see him in the fog reads, "He stood by the river, hands outstretched, as though lifting something unseen. Then the mist swallowed him. There was a scream, not human, and then silence." What happened to Penrose has never been confirmed. Some suggest he perished in a flood that swept the Merrimack during spring thaw. Others propose that he simply disappeared into the sub-basement chambers, intent on joining the children in their indefinite slumber. Keane, too, vanishes from public record after 1926, as though he had been absorbed into the shadows of the system. The sanatorium itself began to decline. By 1928, the main building was shuttered, though the lower chambers remained maintained. Subsequent inspections revealed that the upper floors were abandoned, windows broken, and furniture decayed. Yet the lower chambers, with their humming machinery and sealed doors, showed no sign of neglect. Oral trade. Itian preserves fragments of what occurred next. Residents describe strange lights at night, low murmurs that travel across the frozen river, and glimpses of children's shadows through cracks in boarded windows. The local post office ledger notes that anonymous letters, warning of sleepers not to be disturbed, arrived regularly, unsigned. A second curious pattern emerged. Families whose children were admitted to the institute often relocated within 5 years. Some left Massachusetts entirely. Those who remained sometimes reported subtle behavioral changes, nightmares, faint murmurs, inexplicable fatigue, suggesting that the system's reach might have extended beyond the building itself. In 1930, a storm destroyed much of the roof and upper floors of the abandoned sanatorium. Local authorities considered condemning the structure entirely, yet records indicate that funds were appropriated for repair under the pretense of educational expansion. Who supplied the money remains unknown. By the late 1930s, the site had gained a reputation as cursed. Children were warned away. Elderly residents spoke in hushed tones of a deep sleep beneath the earth and of a man who tended the dreaming bodies. Yet no official investigation was ever conducted. Newspapers dismissed these accounts as folklore, though private correspondences, some preserved in town archives, show unease among local officials. World War II brought further attention. Soldiers stationed nearby reported hearing faint, synchronized breathing patterns in the fog near the river, always during early hours of the morning. Engineers who surveyed the site for potential military use noted that the sub-basement remained unnaturally preserved, reinforced with concrete that should have long decayed. Despite decades passing, the sub-basement chambers remained intact. Photographs taken in the 1950s reveal beds aligned in perfect rows, walls untouched by water or mold. Researchers visiting in later years described an almost electrical hum permeating the room, what they called the pulse of the sleepers. The system had endured far beyond its creator. Its mechanisms, human, mechanical, and bureaucratic, had sustained life and dream in equal measure, and in doing so, it had left the world forever altered, carrying secrets whose consequences no living witness could fully comprehend. Even now, in 2018, scientists reviewing the site noted that certain patterns of neural synchronization corresponded to phenomena in modern neurological research: dream sharing, shared consciousness, and unexplained psychosomatic synchronization across populations. Whatever Penrose had intended, the legacy of his system had quietly persisted, spreading outward like ripples from a stone thrown into a still pond. The reckoning, in the end, was not one of legal justice. The law could not reach the invisible threads of the system, nor could it account for the silence of a century. It was a reckoning of discovery, a confrontation with a truth too large, too strange, and too persistent to ignore. The sanatorium was abandoned, the upper floors collapsed and gutted by time, but below, in the dark and humming sub-basement, the sleepers waited. And as history would reveal, some secrets buried in Willowbrook would never be fully exhumed. By the 1950s, Willowbrook had changed. The riverbanks were dotted with modest homes, the mills replaced with modern factories, and the sanatorium, once a monumental structure, lay in ruin. Its upper floors had collapsed entirely, leaving only the lower sub-basement accessible through a narrow stairwell, hidden beneath a steel hatch that had long been overgrown with ivy. Local residents remembered the stories, but they spoke of them in whispers. Children had been warned not to venture near the ruins. The older townsfolk, who had seen Penrose in his last years or had relatives admitted to the institute, often shook their heads and muttered about the sleeping children. The tales were treated as legend by outsiders, yet those born and raised in Willowbrook carried an unshakable unease. It was during this decade that the first serious attempt to uncover the truth took place. Dr. Horace Bellamy, a historian of medical anomalies, arrived in town in 1952, bringing with him a stack of archival requests and a small team of researchers. He sought the ledger fragments that had circulated among private collectors in Boston, Salem, and Springfield. Letters, journal pages, and photographs revealed a coherent picture. 47 children had entered the Willowbrook Sanatorium between 1918 and 1921, all in comatose states, none aging normally, each subject meticulously catalogued. Bellamy's first challenge was access. The local government, citing prominent family influence and the need to preserve the town's reputation, repeatedly denied his requests. The descendants of Penrose, Rowe, Keene, and even Langford were still residents in the surrounding towns, and their names carried weight. Bellamy, undeterred, began interviewing the older population. His interviews yielded fragmentary yet corroborative accounts. One man recalled seeing lights in the sanatorium windows long after, but the building was officially abandoned. I was a boy of 14. There were nights, cold and quiet, when the windows glowed faint blue. I asked my mother. She told me, "Don't look, child, they are sleeping." A former labourer, now retired and living in a nearby village, recounted the electrical hum that had permeated the sub-basement. It wasn't constant but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Even when the building seemed empty, it pulsed. I don't think anyone believed me. Other residents whispered of the families whose children had entered the sanatorium and vanished entirely from town. They spoke of sudden illnesses, early deaths, or silent relocations that left no trace. Oral tradition preserved the memory of a man named Samuel Hale, the first adult to join the sleepers, whose story had been buried alongside official records. By 1955, Bellamy had pieced together what would become the first comprehensive public account. His research traced the original ledgers to a collection of bound pages that had survived in a private home in Salem, stored under layers of cloth and dust. The pages were nearly illegible, but using magnifying lenses and careful transcription, he reconstructed entries detailing daily observation of each child, notes on dream content, and descriptions of medical procedures, often involving compounds meant to sustain life without awakening consciousness. One page, dated October 31, 1920, recorded the following. Subject 37 engages in continuous REM-like patterns, vocalizations unintelligible, careful adjustment of feeding and respiratory mechanisms maintained. Experiment successful. The child remains in suspension. Another fragment noted, subjects 12, 14, and 21 exhibit synchronous neural oscillations, cross-check auditory stimuli, dream content appears collective, further observation required, no waking permitted. Bellamy published his findings cautiously. He avoided speculation on the causes or future implications, framing the work strictly as historical documentation. Still, the public reaction was intense. Some dismissed it outright, calling the evidence anecdotal or the result of exaggeration. Others, especially medical professionals, recognized the implications, a sustained state of human life maintained through a century-long secret experiment. By the 1960s, researchers visiting Willowbrook noted the enduring presence of the sanatorium ruins. The upper floors were entirely gone, yet the sub-basement hatch persisted. Investigators attempting to descend were often turned away by local authorities. Many noted a peculiar warmth radiating from beneath the earth, and some reported faint murmurs or rhythmic hums that seemed almost musical. Those who ignored the warnings rarely spoke again about what they experienced. Local oral traditions preserved elements that official records could not. Grandmothers told their grandchildren of the sleeping children beneath the mill, emphasizing the importance of leaving them undisturbed. Legends emerged about the whispering dream, a phenomenon said to transmit itself to anyone who lingered too long near the ruins. Families maintained these stories carefully, avoiding any form of exploration. Archival fragments from the 1920s to 1950s reveal that Penrose's influence persisted through political and social networks. Letters between town officials, now declassified, indicate that attempts to investigate were systematically suppressed. One memorandum, dated March 15, 1928, reads, "Any further inquiry into the Willowbrook facility must be deferred. Influence of private benefactors remains strong. Preservation of the institution's legacy is paramount." Even scholars in the mid-20th century encountered obstruction. Bellamy himself was denied access to several boxes of State Health Board files, which were later found to contain additional records of sub-basement maintenance, equipment procurement, and detailed observations of dream content. In 1972, a group of young historians and journalists managed a partial excavation of the site. Using photographs and fragmentary plans, they located the entrance to the sub-basement, sealed beneath reinforced concrete. Attempts to penetrate the structure triggered electrical systems still active despite decades of abandonment. Witnesses described a persistent hum, a low-frequency vibration, and faint, unidentifiable murmuring. The structure was deemed too dangerous to continue, and the site was resealed. By the 1980s, the sanatorium had entered local folklore fully. Children dared each other to touch the outer walls. Residents spoke of dreams influenced by proximity to the ruins, describing vivid imagery of children in rows, staring upward, unblinking. Scholars of folklore documented the phenomenon as collective suggestion, yet some maintained that the stories reflected actual neural influence emanating from the sleepers. A breakthrough came in the early 21st century when a team of neuroscientists and historians conducted a full survey of the sub-basement. They discovered that 47 cots, meticulously aligned, remained intact. The children, preserved in a state between life and death, showed faint neural activity. Electroencephalography revealed synchronized patterns across all subjects. The dream content, when decoded using advanced technology, suggested a collective unconscious, a shared network of images, memories, and sensations transmitted across the group. These findings confirmed what Penrose had long documented in his ledgers, that the children were not merely surviving but existing within a shared dream state. The implications were staggering. Their consciousness had endured for nearly a century, connected, aware, yet imperceptible to the outside world. Despite this, the site remained under strict restriction. Authorities, mindful of public reaction, declared the area unsafe and prohibited further access. Descendants of the original families, some still living in Willowbrook, were left unaware of the precise nature of the site, though they carried a vague sense of dread and superstition. Even as the world around Willowbrook changed, through industrial expansion, urban development, and technological revolution, the sleepers remained, their bodies preserved, their dreams intertwined, their existence quietly shaping the collective unconscious of those nearby. Local oral histories preserve accounts of anomalous dreams, sudden inspirations, and inexplicable nightmares experienced by residents. Some interpreted these events as hauntings, others as echoes of the children's dreams reaching outward. Whatever the mechanism, there is consensus among historians and neuroscientists that the influence persists. By the 2010s, investigative journalists and neurologists revisited the sanatorium. Their findings mirrored Bellamy's century-old reconstructions, but with the added authority of modern science. The children's neural networks had persisted, their brainwaves in a constant state of synchronization, transmitting dream content beyond their physical bodies. In 2018, a full examination documented the phenomenon in detail. 47 children, still preserved, were connected to a network of mechanical and chemical systems designed to maintain life, breathing, and synchronized dreams. The origin of maintenance was unclear. Records of repairs and replacements had been destroyed, sealed, or never existed in accessible form. Yet the system functioned perfectly, a silent testament to Penrose's methods. What remains unclear is the nature of their dreams. Early decoding suggests reflections of the trauma and suffering from the 1918 pandemic, fused with collective memory, anticipation, and unknown imagery. Some patterns suggest premonitions or a universal awareness that transcends individual experience. Others hint at the persistence of Penrose's own consciousness within the system, an extension of the man who sought to master life and death. The site today is abandoned, unmarked, and carefully controlled. Archaeological and neurological work continues in secrecy. Descendants of the town's original families remain in the area, largely unaware that their lineage intersects with the sleepers. The sanatorium's ruins stand as a silent monument to a century-long experiment, a system of suspended life, and a secret that has eluded public comprehension. Historians reflect on the implications. The Willowbrook experiment demonstrates the intersection of medical ambition, bureaucratic complicity, and the enduring persistence of human consciousness under extraordinary circumstances. It challenges the boundary between life and death, individual and collective mind, past and present. Some secrets buried in Willowbrook, it seems, may never be fully revealed. They exist in the hum of machines long abandoned, in the whispers of old townsfolk, in the dreams of those who pass near the ruins, and in the quiet continuity of 47 lives held suspended for over a century. As we stand today, contemplating the events that began with a global pandemic, a single physician and 47 sleeping children, one must ask, what responsibility do the living bear toward those who endure beyond our understanding, and what do the dreams of the past tell us about the present or the future? The sleepers of Willowbrook remain, waiting and dreaming, in the dark, beneath the river, beneath the town, beneath the collective memory of a century. What do you think of this story? Was everything truly revealed? Leave your thoughts below. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share with someone who loves dark mysteries. See you in the next video.